Welcome back, class. We're going to jump into this third segment, and again, as I said earlier in the presentation or in the videos, um, chapter 9 is it's a there's a lot of information packed into chapter 9. So some of these videos are going to be a little longer than maybe you're used to, but we'll keep pushing forward, and we'll eventually get to the end of the chapter. But I think a lot of the information in this chapter is going to be concepts that you can kind of put in your toolbox and use once you either as you continue on your academic career, or maybe somewhere along the line you decide that you want to work in an profit maximizing firm. And I think this is going to really benefit you going forward in your professional career. But we're going to talk for a few minutes about economic profit and economic losses. So economic profit in the short run, we talk about total revenue as a straight line with a fixed slope. Total cost intersects y-axis at the point of total fixed cost. So remember, it's going to intersect your y-axis at that point where total fixed cost is. It increases at a decreasing rate, range of increasing marginal revenue, and increasing rate at a range of decreasing marginal revenue. Economic profits maximized at the vertical distance between total revenue and total cost curves. So that's where we're talking about the short run, and your economic profits are going to be maximized at the vertical distance between the total revenue and the total cost curves. And the text does a pretty good job of mapping this out for us. So again, I hope you're reading along in the text and trying to follow some of this. So most firms don't produce where the total cost is greater than the total revenue. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Total fixed costs must be covered, and total variable costs must be covered. And so that's where you're talking about at the production decisions in the firm. So if you kind of think back of total revenue, profit equals total revenue minus total cost. And if your total fixed costs aren't covered and your total variable costs aren't covered, it's going to be extremely difficult. I mean, it's going to be impossible to make a profit. As long as the slope is the total revenue is greater than the slope of the total cost, you should produce. So firms should produce as long as the slope of that total revenue is greater than the slope of the total cost curve. Maximum profits at the point where the total revenue and the total cost have the same slope. And at that point where they have the same slope, you have a situation where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And that is the point where the total revenue and total cost curves have the same slope. Applying the marginal decision rule. And so when you're talking about the marginal decision rule, again, we go back to it, and we've seen it before in little q, little d, big D. And I think economists just in general, if it's a market curve they're talking about, they're mostly talking about uppercase. If it's an individual firm or an individual, they're usually talking about lowercase. So when you see a lowercase p, q, any of those letters that we're used to seeing, like on the supply and demand curve, if it's lowercase, they're talking about the firm. If it's uppercase, they're talking about the market. Applying the marginal decision rule, profit maximizes levels of output to the point where marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Remember, marginal rule, or the marginal decision rule, Marginal revenue greater than marginal cost, keep on going. Marginal revenue less than marginal cost, don't continue. And you want to produce at that level where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And the marginal decision rule says marginal benefit equals marginal cost. But at the end of the day, you're still talking about maximizing profits or the maximum level of output where those two are equal. Total revenue for the firm is little p times little q, lower level p times lower level q. And if you're talking about the average total cost, it's a total cost, and then we're talking about the firm now, it's a total cost divided by the lowercase q. And then average total cost times q, lowercase q, equals total cost. So again, starting to play, a little math magic with just starting to try to take, and they're, authors are rearranging terms. So you have to kind of think about that when you're fooling with some of these economic concepts or trying to understand some of these economic concepts. That some of them do require a little math magic. Little d equals marginal revenue equals uppercase P, because what is setting the price for the firm? The market sets the price for the firm. So that's how they're taking and using the market information and the firm information to get to the demand at the firm level is equal to marginal revenue, which is equal to the market price point. So profit is equal to, again, we go back to the profit formula. Total, profit's equal to total revenue minus total cost. And profit at that point becomes capital P or uppercase P minus the average total cost, and that's in parentheses. So to get to profit, it's the market price minus the average total cost in parentheses multiplied by the lowercase q. And price, capital, the capital P or the market price, uppercase, it's the lowest point of the average total cost curve, and that gives you the greatest profit per unit. So again, I hope you're going back to the textbook and looking at the diagrams that they're providing you in the textbook, because some of this information may sound a little strange or a little foreign, or maybe even, bordering on gibberish, but taking the information, taking the textbook and sitting down with it, and then, combining it with the class notes and the videos should help you become extremely familiar with these concepts that they're producing for you in the book. So now we've been talking about economic profits in the short run, and we're going to flip now to economic losses in the short run. And it's an economic loss is the amount by which a firm's total cost exceeds its total revenue. So now we're getting into a situation, and we talked about it just a few minutes ago, where we've got an economic loss is where total cost exceeds your total revenue. Inputs are fixed. Remember, we're talking about the short run. Inputs are fixed, still has to pay fixed cost, can't leave the market, because it's really difficult in the short run because you've got these fixed inputs. Remember, in the short run, your variable is labor. So, or at least in most firms, that's going to be the variable. In the short run, it's going to be labor. So everything else is fixed. The firm can either has two decisions if they're suffering an economic loss. You can either continue to produce, or you can pull the plug and shut down. Now, shutting down doesn't necessarily mean going out of business, because it may be a situation where you shut down in a, I'm not saying indefinitely, where you shut down for a brief period of time, And then when the factors of production or the price of the commodity that you're producing comes back in line, then you open up and you start producing again. And so when we're if the firm does decide to continue to produce, and so now you're talking about producing at a loss, and so at that point the price is less than the average total cost. Marginal return equals marginal cost allows to minimize losses. If shut down and production is zero, you still have to cover the fixed cost. You may have if you shut down, you may not have any variable cost because you're not generating any output, but you've got the fixed cost, or some economists you'll see in some textbooks they'll call it a sunk cost, but you still got those fixed costs. And if you're talking about producing at a loss, the average fixed cost equals the average total cost minus the average variable cost. Remember, one of the earlier formulas we had, average total cost equal average fixed cost plus average variable cost. And the average fixed cost times the little q equals to total fixed cost. Because remember, you're not going to have any variable cost unless you are actually generating some type of output. As long as price is greater than the average variable cost, you should continue to produce. As long as you're covering your average variable cost. So if the market price that you're a competitive firm, again, you're a price taker, if that market price, so the uppercase P, is greater than your average variable cost, you should continue to produce, because at that point, you're going to be covering some of your fixed costs. May not be covering them all, but you're covering some portion of those fixed costs. So as a firm or as a farmer, let's take the case of a farmer. As a farmer, you're not eating the entire fixed cost as long as the market price is greater than your average variable cost. And then the second decision that the firm can decide to make is do the shutdown. And shutting down to minimize economic loss, and where you just make that decision to shut down is if the uppercase P, the market price, is less than the average variable cost. At that point, you need to shut down because you're not covering your variable cost and you're not covering your fixed cost. And at that point, you do need to shut down. Closing the doors, and I said earlier, closing the doors doesn't mean going out of business. Can reopen again at that point that the market price is greater than the average variable cost. The shutdown point, and they spend a few minutes talking about a shutdown point, it's the minimum level of average variable cost which occurs at the intersection of the marginal cost and the average variable cost curves. At that point, that is the quote shutdown point for a firm. And if you go back to the years that we were impacted by COVID, there were a lot of firms had to make these decisions. A lot of firms shut their doors. They didn't go out of business. They shut their doors, and especially restaurants shut their doors, they didn't have anybody coming by. I was still in Buffalo right in the middle of COVID, and there was in downtown, and I rented an apartment downtown Buffalo because I could walk back and forth to work, and there were just business. It looked like a ghost town in downtown Buffalo during COVID, and you had a lot of businesses close their doors, didn't go out of business. They just shut down at that point. And as soon as the yahoos and the state of New York legislature decided that you could start getting out and moving around some, then you saw these businesses starting to gradually open the doors again, because at that point the market price for those goods and services that the restaurants, especially restaurants, are providing, became greater than the average variable cost, and they started opening their doors again. We're going to talk just a few minutes about marginal cost and supply. A firm produces at a point, again, where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but at the same time, this is an extremely important point. You're going to produce at that point or up to that point where that marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And you produce at those levels as long as the market price is greater than the average variable cost. So that's a key concept to remember, and it's a key concept to put in that toolbox. Firm's marginal cost curve is its supply curve as long as the price is greater than the average variable cost. If the price is less than the average variable cost, output drops to what? 0. Because once price falls below average variable cost, that determines at that point you need to at least close your doors for some amount of time until that market price comes back into play and becomes greater than your average variable cost. So now we've been in the short run talking about the pieces of this chapter in the short run, or the components in this chapter in the short run, and now we're going to flip things a little, and we're going to go, long run. And if you remember in chapter 8, we started out short run, and at some point we flipped it to the long run, and now we're flipping this chapter to the long run. Perfect competition, we're going to talk about perfect competition in the long run. Firms maximize profit. Again, doesn't matter short run or long run, you're maximizing profits where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. Firms' profits can be measured mathematically and graphically as price. Remember the formula where we talked about market price minus average total cost in parentheses multiplied by the lowercase q. And so you're talking about a profit component. So to make a profit or to generate profit, it's price minus average total cost. And so to get to your total profit, you can take that market price, the uppercase P, subtract off your average total cost in parentheses and multiply it by the lowercase q. That's going to get your firm at your firm level profit, and you can do it mathematically, you can do it graphically. Firms should produce even if bearing losses, as long as, and we've talked about this in the short run, as long as the market price is greater than the average variable cost, otherwise shut down. And again, as long as it's greater than the average variable cost, you're going to be covering some of those fixed costs. And as the text talks about, once that market price falls below the average variable cost, at that point, it's time to shut down and wait for the price to swing back in the other direction. We're going to take a brief pause here, and we'll be back and hopefully put this chapter to bed with one last segment. Talk to you soon.